Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. My name's Josh, and today we are chatting about cameras, specifically which Canon mirrorless camera I think you should purchase if you're going to buy a new camera in 2023. Now, if you are in the process of deciding what camera to buy in 2023 and you're looking at all the different Canon mirrorless cameras, there's a stupid amount of cameras that you can choose from. Literally just pulled up the Canon website here, and as you scroll through just their mirrorless camera options, they have 11 different camera bodies to choose from, ranging from about $500 all the way up to about $6,000, and all the cameras have different specs, they have different features, and they're geared towards different types of photographers and videographers. And if you're trying to choose between one of those, it can get really, really confusing. So what I want to do today for you guys is just literally break down my thoughts on all the different Canon mirrorless options on the market right now. Now, this is recorded in June of 2023, and by July of 2023, I'm sure there'll be 4 new cameras on the market. But as of June of 2023, this is where we stand, and I just want to walk through my opinions and my recommendations on which camera to purchase if you're looking at buying a camera in 2023. Now, how I've decided to break down this video is into specific chapter segments based on the category of photographer that you are. So if you're like a beginner photographer, hobbyist photographer, I have a section on that. If you're a wedding, lifestyle, portrait photographer, I have a section on that. So if you're interested only in one specific category, feel free to skip to that part of the video and I'll chat about my recommended camera for that specific category. But if you're a camera nerd like me and you just want to look at all the different camera options and what I think is the best camera in that specific category, watch the whole video. Plus it helps my channel out a lot. So that'd be amazing if you did that. But basically I'm just going to dive in and walk through all these different categories, look at all the different cameras, all the different specs, and then recommend one specific camera that I think is the best camera in each category, as well as a few honorable mentions. So settle in, grab your coffee, whatever else you're drinking, and hopefully this will be a helpful look at all the different Canon cameras on the market as of June of 2023 and which cameras I think would be best suited for your specific needs. All right, so let's dive in first by talking about beginner/hobbyist photographers. Basically, people who want to have great image quality, good autofocus, and a camera that's not super expensive. You don't really care about all the bells and whistles, especially video features and high frame rate and all that kind of stuff. You just want a capable camera that can capture the life of your family or your kids or your grandkids, take on trips, that kind of thing. And my recommendation for the best camera in this category is the Canon R10. So I've pulled up the Canon R10 here on the B&H website, and you can see this camera comes in at well under $1,000. If you kit this out with like a kit lens or something, or if you buy a little nifty 50 prime lens for this, you're right around $1,000 for the whole package. And this camera is a 24 megapixel APS-C, so cropped frame sensor. But this is going to be absolutely plenty for the beginner photographer, hobbyist photographer who just wants a capable camera with good autofocus, good image quality that can just capture photos of life. The camera does have a little flippy LCD screen, which is great if you're trying to shoot selfies. It has a pop-up flash, which I don't use personally, but again, for the beginner, for the hobbyist, this is a fantastic camera. It's really just going to check all the boxes of what you would need in a basic camera to start you out, and you're not spending more than $1,000 to get the camera and the lens, which is honestly, I think, a great deal. Now, a couple honorable mentions here. If you don't have $1,000 to spend and you want to spend a little bit less money, I would recommend the brand new EOS R100 camera. Now, this camera does not have a flippy LCD screen. It is still a 24 megapixel camera, but it only does 4K 24 video with a crop, and so you're not getting the same kind of video quality you would get on the R10 for less than $500, and you just want to basically get a camera body that can take good photos, has some video capabilities, and you really don't care about any bells and whistles. The R100 is fantastic for that. And then my other runner up here, if you have some extra money to spend, would be the R8. This is a fantastic camera, also still a 24.2 megapixel sensor, but now this is a full frame sensor, so you're going to have better colors, you're going to have better low light performance. It's just a better sensor overall. You'll also have some enhanced video features. You're going to have a great focusing system built into that as well. And you're also going to have some fun little extra features built into the camera that are just going to make the photography experience all that much better. So if you have the money and you want to spend that on the R8, I think that's fantastic. But for a beginner or for a hobbyist, the R10 is kind of the best of all worlds. It's going to give you a great photography camera, a capable video camera, all in a package that costs less than $1,000. So if you're a beginner or a hobbyist, I would recommend the Canon R10. Let's move on now to wedding and lifestyle photographers. And really the categories I'm looking here is I really want to have a camera that has a full frame sensor because I want to have the best color performance, the best low light performance I can get, as well as I really want to have dual card slots. And I think the best camera in the Canon range for that is the Canon EOS R6 Mark II. Now, I own the original R6, the Mark I version of this camera, and it's been a very, very capable camera. The R6 Mark II takes that R6 and just levels that up. It has 2 card slots, it has great autofocus, it has great video capabilities, great photo capabilities. It's a full frame sensor, and it's a very, very light package overall. So if you're looking for a camera that can just kind of do everything you want it to, I think you cannot go wrong with this camera. Now, some honorable mentions here. people are going to immediately start going, well, what about the R5? What about the R5? I think the R5 is a phenomenal camera as well. I've used this camera. I really enjoyed this camera. But honestly, I think it's a little bit overkill if you're in the wedding or the lifestyle world. If you're taking family portraits, senior portraits, weddings, capturing events and stuff, you don't really need 45 megapixels. Now, if that's something you want and you have the storage capacity and the computer capability to render and to run those 45 megapixel files, it's going to take a lot of storage space. It's going to take a lot of processing power to edit those files. But the R5 is a phenomenal camera. The nice thing is you get that little top LCD screen, which is helpful. You get some additional video features, some additional customization options in it. It's a phenomenal camera. The image quality is fantastic. But the price point is substantially higher than the R6 Mark II. And so that's why I think the R6 Mark II is the best you can get in this category. But the R5 is definitely the runner up here and a phenomenal camera in its own right. So if you have the money for it, you want that extra resolution, and that would be helpful, the R5 is a great way to go as well. And then I can't get out of this category without talking about my camera that I use, which is the R3. Again, I think this is overkill for most people. I have a specific use case that I need this camera. The R5, the R6, the R6 Mark II would not fill that category for me. But the R3 truly is a fantastic camera and a good contender in that wedding, event, portrait, lifestyle field. It also has that little LCD screen on the top of the camera like the R5, which is really convenient. It has a bunch of external button customization. It has insanely good battery life because it has those huge chunky batteries from like the 1DX Mark II, 1DX Mark III. And so in the event space, in the wedding space, if you want the best battery life without having to buy a grip and all that kind of stuff, the R3 is phenomenal. The autofocus system is out of this world, even compared to the R5. So if you're in the market for a camera like this and you have the money to spend, it's a phenomenal camera. But again, I think it's a little bit overkill for the traditional photographer in the wedding, lifestyle, portrait space. I think that R6 Mark II is going to be the absolute best you can get for the price point and would be able to completely knock it out of the park and do everything you need to do for weddings, for events, for family photos, senior photos, portraits, newborns, anything like that. The R6 Mark II is absolutely my recommendation for the best camera in the wedding and the lifestyle space. All right, let's go ahead and move on to sports. And you really can't talk about sports without talking about the Canon R3. This camera was designed for the sports world. Just the fact that it has the big integrated grip into the body, it's super robust for any kind of weather situation you might be in, it has all those external button customizations, it has insanely good autofocus, it has a 12 frames per second mechanical shutter, a 30 frames per second electronic shutter, and it has the ability to boost that electronic shutter all the way up to, get this, it's mind-blowing, 196 frames per second in raw photos. And so this camera is absolutely my recommendation if you're in the sports world and you want the best. Also, the stacked sensor in this camera really helps with rolling shutter, which is some of that kind of wobbling you can get and some of the weird bending you can get in your images when you're shooting a lot of action. And so this camera is absolutely phenomenal at helping to mitigate that. And so if you're in the market for like the best sports camera that Canon offers, I think the R3 is the clear winner here. That being said, I think the R6 Mark II is actually a really close contender. And if you look at the specs on this, the R6 Mark II also has a 12 frames per second mechanical shutter, and it actually has a 40 frames per second electronic shutter. Now, I don't know if this camera has the shutter boost like up to 196. I don't believe it does. I think 40 frames per second is where this camera maxes out. And so if you need that extra boost, if that's helpful in the sports world, I don't think the R6 Mark II offers that. But honestly, this camera is a really good contender. It has incredible autofocus. It has great frames per second. I think the R6 Mark II would be a great sports camera as well. And then one more runner up here that I do want to mention, and that's the Canon EOS R7. Now this is a cropped frame APS-C sensor camera, which means you're not getting the full sensor readout compared to like a full frame camera, but this can be really helpful if you're trying to get that extra reach on your sensor and you want to effectively punch in a little bit closer if you're doing sports and you want to shoot super telephoto. The R7 is a fantastic option for that. It actually has a 15 frames per second mechanical shutter, which is better than the R3 or the R6 Mark II, and it also still has a 30 frames per second electronic shutter. And so it's still going to perform really, really well in the sports world. It actually has higher resolution than the R3 or the R6 Mark II, and it can actually beat both of those cameras on the mechanical shutter. So this is a fantastic option. Again, it's a cropped sensor camera, and so you just have to be aware of that. But I don't think you're going to really go wrong looking at the R7 and the price point at $1,400. That's a really, really great deal for a sports camera. But again, I think the R3 takes the cake when it comes to sports. All right, moving on now again to what I'm going to call my high-res photographers. These are landscape photographers, studio photographers, and commercial photographers. And I think the camera of choice here is going to be obvious. That's the Canon EOS R5. In terms of the Canon lineup and resolution, nothing's going to beat that 45 megapixel full frame sensor of the R5. So if you're doing studio work, you want to capture really high res landscapes, you're doing commercial work where you need that resolution, the R5 is absolutely going to be the camera for you. And honestly, this camera is a phenomenal camera. I've used this camera. I really, really like this camera. It didn't end up making it to my shelf personally, but it's a phenomenal camera. And if you're in that landscape world, that studio world, that commercial world where you need high resolution, this camera is absolutely the best you can get from Canon. Now we do have a runner-up to the R5, and that's actually the camera we just talked about, which is the R7. The R7 actually has the second highest megapixel count of all the Canon mirrorless cameras, other than the R5, coming in at 32.5 megapixels. Now this camera is a cropped sensor camera, and so if you need the full frame readout, that's where the R5 is going to absolutely dominate. But if you want a good B cam to the R5 and you're not worried about the cropped sensor, or you have the lenses to kind of work around that, the R7 is a fantastic camera. And again, look at that price, $1,400 for a 32.5 megapixel camera versus the R5, which is coming in at $3,400. That's a huge, huge difference in price between the R5 and the R7, but the R5 definitely takes the top step as my best recommendation for studio, commercial, landscape work, basically anything where you need high res. Moving on now to the video world, and I specifically want to talk about YouTubers and casual videographers. Basically what we're looking at here is a camera that has video features that are capable of doing most anything you'd want casually for video, not any specific pro features, but basically a camera that you could film YouTube videos with, you could vlog with, you could travel with. Basically, what's the best Canon mirrorless camera for the casual videographer? And I think the camera that clearly wins here is the Canon EOS R6 Mark II. The upgrades they made on this Mark II version from the original R6 were incredibly focused on the video features, and this camera has some incredible video features. If you want a camera that has 4K oversampled from 6K, so you're going to get a really, really crisp 4K readout, you have C-Log 3, you can shoot 4K 60 10-bit internal, and there's also a lot of additional features in this camera like focused breathing compensation and false color, zebras, peaking, some stuff that other cameras don't offer or don't offer as comprehensively as the R6 Mark II does. So I think overall, for the casual videographer, YouTuber, vlogger, I think the R6 Mark II is fantastic. Now there are some runners up here. I think the R8 is also a phenomenal camera. You're still getting 4K 60 10-bit internal, you're still getting C-Log 3, you're still getting a full frame sensor, and you're getting all that at a substantially reduced price point from the R6. Now this camera is not going to be as good as the R6 Mark II overall, but if you want a camera that can do really, really capable video, I think the R8 is also a fantastic option, and at the price point, you really, really can't beat it. And one more camera that we haven't talked about yet that I think would be great for the YouTuber and casual vlogger is the Canon R50. This is basically the successor to the M50, and honestly, at the price point, you have a camera that's less than $700 for the body. You have the capacity to shoot UHD 4K 30, and basically this camera is being marketed to that casual vlogger YouTuber. This camera is definitely worth looking at if you're on a budget, but you still want to be able to capture great video. Overall, I think the R6 Mark II still takes the top step here, but definitely check out the R8 and the R50 as well. Moving on to the next category, and I'm calling this my hybrid category. So this is people who want to shoot photo and video. This includes hobbyists who want to have a really great photo platform as well as a good video platform, photographers like me who are shooting photo and video in a professional sense, or you're doing travel work where you want to have one camera that can shoot photo and then easily switch over to video. This category is all about the mesh between photography and video. And my recommendation for the best hybrid camera on the market from Canon right now is the Canon R6 Mark II. Now we keep coming back to this camera because honestly, this camera is really just all that good. When this camera came out as a successor to the R6, which was already a good hybrid camera in its own right, they really upped the game in terms of the video capabilities, which is one of the places where the R6 was lacking. We've already talked about this camera and how it can take great photographs. It has a great autofocus system, but this camera can also take incredible video. You have external 6K ProRes RAW recording options. You have 4K 60 10-bit internal video. You have C-Log 3, which basically means you have a camera that can take phenomenal quality video and then immediately switch over to photo mode. And one of the things I really like about this camera and kind of what feels like the direction that Canon's going in general is this little photo video toggle on the top, which is something the R5 and the original R6 did not have. So you can easily switch between photo and video modes with just a flip of a switch, meaning you have a very capable photo camera, and then at the flip of a switch, now you're in video mode and can capture 4K 60 10-bit internal C-Log 3 video or 6K RAW if you have an external recorder. So for the hybrid photo video shooter, I think the R6 Mark II is definitely the best you can buy from Canon, especially considering the price. Now, a couple honorable mentions here. I think the R5 is also a serious contender here. The R5 has 8K video. You can record raw internal, which is amazing on a camera, and you have that 45 megapixel sensor. And so if you need like the best photo quality and the best video quality in terms of resolution, the R5 is going to be fantastic for that. But really the price is what separates it from the R6 Mark II. And the R6 Mark II is just such a capable camera at a substantially reduced price from the R5. And that's why I think the R6 Mark II kind of takes the edge here, but the R5 is definitely an honorable mention and a very, very close runner-up in the hybrid photo and video world. And then one more honorable mention here, and that's back to my trusty R3. I think this camera is a phenomenal hybrid photo and video camera. Again, this is the camera that I use personally. You can shoot 6K RAW internally on this camera. You also have 4K 120, you have C-Log 3. Like the R5, the R3 also has that CF Express Type B card, and so you can have higher bitrate video, which is something the R6 Mark II does not allow. And so I think in the hybrid photo video world, the R6 Mark II, R5, and the R3 are really the best contenders overall. I still think the R6 Mark II kind of edges the other two out, but you're going to really have to make the decision. Do you need higher bitrate video? Do you need higher frames per second shooting? Do you need 8K? Do you want a smaller camera body, or do you want the battery life of the R3? Overall, I think the R6 Mark II is the best hybrid photo/video camera that Canon offers. But again, I think the R5 and the R3 are serious contenders. And if you're in this world, you probably know what you're looking for. And I think those three cameras are the cameras you're going to be kind of juggling between and have to decide which one best suits your specific needs. Now, one quick note here. I know I did not mention the R5C in this hybrid photo video comparison. And honestly, that's just because this camera was really designed to be a video centric camera with some photo options. But the problem is when I'm looking at a hybrid photo video platform, I want a camera that can very quickly switch back and forth between the two. And while the R5C can switch back and forth between the two, it actually has to reboot and go through a whole sequence to actually switch over from photo mode to video mode. So this camera is really designed more for the pro cinematographer who also wants to have some great photo options, not for someone who's in the hybrid world and wants to switch back and forth very, very quickly. And so that's why the R5C did not make the list, but it's going to top the next list, which is my pro videographer list. So if you're a pro videographer and you're looking for a mirrorless camera platform in the Canon range, the R5C is absolutely the place to go. This camera was designed for cinematic video. It still has some great photography options, but really the entire chassis of the camera, all the button layouts on the outside of the camera have been specifically engineered for videographers. You obviously have that built-in cooling fan. You have timecode integration. And so if you're a pro videographer and you're specifically looking for a mirrorless camera, I think the R5C is an obvious no-brainer. Now, there are two cameras that I feel are pretty close runner-ups here. First one is going to be the R3. The R3 is a really serious contender in the pro video market because it has 6K RAW internal to the camera, it has incredible battery life, and that stacked sensor means you have really minimized rolling shutter and a camera body that's a little bit heavier, a little bit chunkier, and just allows for a little bit more of those smooth movements when you're working in the pro video world. And so while I think the R5C obviously outpaces the R3 in terms of the cinematography angle with timecode integration and specific button layouts and the cooling fan and all that, the R3 is a really, really good runner up here. Is it the best you can buy? No, it's not the best you can buy, but it's definitely a serious contender. And if you're looking for a pro video camera, definitely take a look at the R3. And finally, I want to talk about wildlife photographers. And I think honestly, the best camera for this in the Canon range is the R7. Now, we've already talked about the Canon R7, but it has that incredible 32 megapixel sensor, which is a higher resolution than most of the sensors in the Canon range right now. That's also a cropped APS-C sensor, so you're going to get some extra telephoto reach compared to what you would get with a full frame sensor, which is really going to help if you're trying to shoot a lot of telephoto shots of animals that are far away. You're still getting a great autofocus system, and you have a very responsive shutter coming in at 15 frames per second on the mechanical and 30 on the electronic, and all of that at a fantastic price point. So I think for wildlife photographers, this is probably the best camera that Canon offers currently, but I think there are a few honorable mentions here. I think the R5 is also a good contender, honestly, just because it has the 45 megapixel sensor and that 8K video. So if you're looking to shoot video of animals and you want to have like the best resolution, you want to have the best detail retained, the R5 is going to do a fantastic job with that. And because you had that 45 megapixel sensor, you're going to be able to crop in on those images and effectively get around the same resolution as you would on the R7. But obviously that's coming at a much higher price point. And so I still think the R7 edges the R5 out there. And then I also think it's worth talking about the R3 specifically because of the autofocus performance and honestly because of how fast that electronic shutter can shoot if you ramp it all the way up. So if you're shooting really, really fast moving animals and you need that 196 frames per second insane electronic shutter, I think this camera is going to be a fantastic option for that. But again, is it worth $5,500 currently versus the R7, which is $1,400? I personally wouldn't think so if I was in the market for a camera for wildlife photography. I think the clear winner in the wildlife photography world is the R7. So those are my thoughts on the best Canon camera in all of those different photographic categories, but I have one more category I want to chat about, and that's what I think the best Canon camera is overall on the market right now, and that is, drumroll, the R6 Mark II. Now, this should come as no surprise because this camera has come up in almost every single list we've looked at. The R6 Mark II is a phenomenal camera. The original R6 was a super popular camera, and this Mark II version really just leveled up all the features of the R6 and made this camera a fantastic hybrid camera at a really, really good price point. And I think if you're in the market for a Canon camera, you have the money to spend on an R6 Mark II, you don't have specific needs where you need something like an R5, or you need an APS-C sensor, or you need like the focusing system or the body or the battery life of the R3. Overall, I think the R6 Mark II is my winner for the best Canon camera in 2023. Now, there is one runner-up here that I want to mention, and that's actually the Canon R7. I really don't want to sleep on this R7 camera because look at this price point. This price point is literally $1,400, and for $1,400, you get a 32 megapixel camera, you get 4K 60, 10-bit video, you get C-Log 3, you get the dual pixel CMOS autofocus 2, you get a 15 frames per second mechanical shutter with a 30 frames per second electronic shutter, you get that flip LCD screen, you get a good electronic viewfinder, you also get 2 card slots, so you have that backup, and even though this camera is an APS-C sensor, you're getting all of that for $1,400 compared to the R6 Mark II, which comes in about $2,500. So don't sleep on the R7. Now, is this camera for everybody? I don't think so. I think that R6 still hits more points than the R7 does, but don't sleep on the R7, especially if you're on a little bit tighter of a budget and you don't mind that APS-C sensor. The R7 is a phenomenal camera. So hopefully that's been a helpful look at all the different cameras that Canon offers in their mirrorless range right now, and my thoughts and my opinions on which camera would be best in each different category that we mentioned. If there's something I didn't mention or if there's questions you have about any of that, feel free to let me know, and I will see you in the next video. Have a great day. Peace.